Got the engine sitting in where it belongs, finally. Had both front motor mounts bolted down. I did find that it was a little easier. You gotta be careful with those bolts that go into the front motor mounts, because they drop down through those spools on the mount plate, and then they thread into an insert in the biscuit, and then there's another rubber piece and captive nut and everything goes on the bottom. But you want to be careful you don't cross thread those bolts going into the biscuits. And what I found was that I got the first one in over there by the generator. The second one didn't want to start, so what I did was I took the bolts out of the biscuit, hold the biscuit to the frame, and got the long bolt threaded into the biscuit, and then it was a lot easier to line up the two bolts going into the frame and put them in rather than monkey up the threads in the biscuit. So the engine is now sitting where it belongs, but every solution creates a problem, so we'll identify the problem that got created here in a minute. You might remember that we had to take the top off the transmission in order to be able to slide the whole adventure back in there. And when you take the top off the transmission, you're going to find three little springs in these holes. And under those springs are the detents that put tension on the shift rails. So fair enough, we took the top off. We knew the springs were there. We were real careful and took the springs out, so I put them aside and got our transmission back in. And quite honestly, I don't think it's possible to take this transmission out without taking the engine out or taking the taking the firewall section off. So I shouldn't want to have to take the engine out again. Anyway, we went to put the top back on, and the first time we put the top back on, it didn't line up. The shift gate here didn't line up, the neutral gate. So we had to move around a little bit. And when we went to push down it the second time, it went wrong, and one of our springs disappeared. So that's always fun. And the problem is that we didn't really know where it disappeared to. Odds are, chances are, most likely it went down inside the transmission. So, oh, that sounds like fun. Luckily, we were able to pull the drain plug, drain the oil out, reach our finger up in there, and find that spring. So now we're back to putting our three springs in our three holes and being real careful trying to put the top on. I think what we're going to do is pack some grease into these holes to hold those springs in place. I mean, it won't keep them from jumping around, but it certainly may hold them just enough for us to get our top back on. There are three corresponding holes in the top cover, so it's not like you can just put the cover on and press down on them. You got to get those springs up in the holes in the top cover while you're trying to put the top cover on. And of course, we've got studs in the top of the transmission rather than bolts, so it just makes for a fun situation. So we'll see if we can get it all put back together without any more drama and move on to the next project. We got the top back on the transmission successfully, and I think we're gonna got it to shift gears, looks like it, some fashion. We still have to replace the transmission mounts with some new ones. We just got one in right now. We've also put the drive shaft in, bolted it in front to back, and just for giggles, we're trying to put the drive shaft tunnel, I suppose you would call it, in. And of course, it doesn't want to fit you know, it wouldn't be a case where you could just drop it right in. So I'm going to have to try to figure out what goes on there. There's not enough clearance between this point here and this point down here for that tunnel to slide in there, so I suspect what we're going to have to do is jack the transmission up to be able to slide that thing in, and that's what we'll do now. So I guess it's a good thing that we didn't have our new transmission mounts bolted in yet. We'll see. And so that is the case. You have to jack up the transmission to be able to get that tunnel on top of the frame rail and underneath the shift tower and sit down in place. And we just have it sitting in there with a couple of screwdrivers in the back, and of course it has two pins, two bolts sticking down through in the front. So for right now it's temporary. I'm sure we'll have to take the thing back out of there again, but at least now we know how it goes in and out. I also have to remember to refill the transmission with gear oil, and we have a little dipstick there on the other side so we know how much to put in. I think I'll lay the floorboards back in here for the time being and see what's next. We stuck the floorboards in and propped up our steering column a little bit and dug out the transmission tunnel, and it doesn't look so good. I think over the years, 30, 40, 50 years, however long this has been sitting, it seems to have shrunk because it's too short and too narrow and not deep enough, and 12 other things. If anybody has any suggestions on how to reshape one of these things, let me know. Otherwise, it looks like we're going to have to buy a replacement, and man, they're like $300 or so. So it's not something I really want to do, but the way things look, I don't know that we're going to have any choice. It really is not fitting down there and not fitting up there and not fitting anywhere. So we're going to have a look at that. Really, we don't need that for a while yet, but we're going to need it eventually. And we're going to make some new floorboards, but I'm going to wait till we get a little farther into the body for that. One other thing that we had to do was to straighten the arm on the bell housing for the clutch linkage, because the little chain that goes back to the clutch pedal was right up against the stoplight switch, and that wasn't going to be too spiffy. So we put a little heat on the arm and straightened it a little bit, and rather than push our luck there and snap the thing off, I think what we're going to do is maybe slot the holes for the stoplight switch and just move it in a little bit to give it a little bit more clearance. And I think some of this stuff has been sitting around so long and has been moved so many times, and who knows if it's dropped or kicked or whatever. And some of these arms and levers and stuff have gotten tweaked, and now when it comes time to get everything to line up again, nothing wants to fit. So we'll keep working at it, get things to fit, see if we can't get it back together.